After Hitchcock kick-started the slasher genre with his OG masterpiece Psycho in 1960, many people have come to associate the genre's popularity and influence with John Carpenter's Halloween. And sure, while Halloween helped propel the genre to widespread notoriety, what many people don't realize is that once you strip Halloween off the shape, it actually loses much of its originality when put up against a very similar seasonal slasher that emerged only a few years before it. This was Black Christmas. In fairness, Black Christmas isn't exactly all that original either. It drew from the now ubiquitous urban legend surrounding the babysitter and the man upstairs, the grim story of a babysitter receiving anonymous phone calls from a stranger before she informs the police, who eventually trace the call from inside the house, where the man upstairs has murdered the children. The legend is traced back to a 1950 police case where a 13-year-old girl was raped and murdered while babysitting a 3-year-old, only for the case to go unsolved after the accused suspect sued the local police department for wrongful imprisonment. Of course, this story takes on a magnitude of variations and fear-mongering adjustments and essentially set the framework for most slasher movies that followed, but the fear generated by the narrative wasn't just the random stranger violence we commonly associate with. It was purely the idea of, what if there was someone hiding in your house without you knowing it? It really makes you reconsider what that creaking noise is, doesn't it? Black Christmas is basically the same plot structure turned into a simple yet provocative slasher set in a sorority house during Christmas, where a mentally disturbed man hides in the attic and murders each of the occupants. The man is simply referred to as the Moaner by the main characters, or Billy as his name is later revealed. Much like Michael Myers in the original Halloween, Billy's background is only ever vaguely alluded to. In fact, he's probably more ambiguous, as the film relies solely on his obscene cryptic phone calls, where he seems to play multiple characters to relive some sort of troubled childhood. Of course, if you've watched the mean-spirited 2006 remake that tried to pull a Rob Zombie's Halloween by delving into unnecessary backstory, it pretty much unapologetically stomps all over the nuance of the original film's storytelling. By blurting out information you could probably work out just by piecing together the phone calls and visual clues. Hell, the remake even went as far as to introduce the mysterious Agnes he keeps referring to as a secondary antagonist, while basing Billy off the real-life serial killer Edmund Kemper instead of keeping him as some random everyday dude. While some claim the changes and twists were to make it less predictable and accommodate a more modern audience, unsurprisingly many other reports suggest that the Weinstein brothers greatly interfered with the film by demanding the extra antagonist and altering the ending to have Billy get gruesomely killed, which was the opposite of the original film's ambiguous and again nuanced conclusion. Like the original, the remake is extremely violent and unforgivingly cruel, yet is largely forgettable due to these odd creative decisions that tried to make it more clever than it actually was. In fact, the only thing I remember from it was that they decided to give Billy jaundice due to liver failure because... Stop asking questions. Anyway, the original Black Christmas is one of the bleaker slashers out there. It's kinda like Texas Chainsaw, which released the same year, where it wants to feel like a reimagining of a true crime story to create a sense of authenticity. Director and producer Bob Clark wanted to ground the film in reality and reject the Hollywood stereotypes associated with female characters and college students at the time by giving each of them relatable personalities. A noble premise that eventually went out the window considering many of the slasher movies that followed. The key distinction with Black Christmas over most other slasher movies at the time was that for a film as infamously grim and violent as it was, when it was funny, the humour was absolutely spot on. While some characters are timid and modest, there are a few standout lovable characters such as Mrs. McHenry, who appears to be hiding stashes of alcohol all over the house, and in another scene she's awkwardly trying to hide a nude picture as an overprotective father searches the sorority house.
Ho, 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 shit.
Every character, for as little screen time as some of them have, is sympathetic and personable, making each death all the more harrowing. I think the word twisted best describes the chain of events. I mean, just the simple use of Christmas as this symbolic contrast, where such a joyous, peaceful time of year can also be a time for danger to lurk in the darkness of winter nights, helps perpetuate the overarching atmosphere. You could say it adds a remarkable sense of tragedy to the film, especially considering the emotional weight that's applied to the opening kill to set the tone for the rest of the film. In the opening, while everyone is celebrating, we see it predominantly from Billy's menacing perspective, as he stalks and sneaks his way into the house, trapping us in a literal voyeuristic mindset where we are fully aware of the danger and helplessly watch each oblivious victim meet their demise. His first kill is a shy, innocent, and somewhat lonely girl who gets horrifically suffocated before juxtaposing her corpse with a scene of her father anxiously awaiting her arrival to come home for Christmas. In the realm of slashers that followed, death in this film actually means something, further heightened later in the film when it's revealed that a child's gruesome corpse is discovered out in the cold without little context. The impact of death only adds to the realism, and continues with the introduction to police procedural elements. Later, after reporting the disturbing phone calls, in order to track the call, the police need the main character Jess to keep the caller on the phone as long as possible, so the tracer can identify a location. It's admittedly a mundane scene, but showing us the inner workings of why people need to stay on the line long enough, again, helps add a sense of authenticity to the story. It even throws another spanner in the works when Jess's boyfriend Peter, who looks like Joel McHale in a wig, becomes a suspect. It's discovered that Jess is pregnant with Peter's baby, but she wants to have an abortion so she doesn't have to reprioritize her life given she's still in college. Peter becomes emotionally distressed by this, and soon it becomes pretty obvious that he must be the killer. Right? You know the way most Final Girl climaxes all usually play out the same way? Well, this film decided to completely overhaul those expectations with quite a heartbreaking climax. All these connections place Peter as the prime suspect, bar the one time the caller phoned when Peter was next to Jess. But when Jess finds herself the sole survivor trying to escape the killer by hiding in the basement, along comes Peter with convenient timing to apologize, presented with the same creepy presence as the killer, to which we cut to the police's perspective where Jess has caved Peter's head in with a fire poker. Everyone at this point just assumes Peter is the killer, except the reality is, once everyone leaves Jess to rest, the killer didn't go anywhere. The twisted irony is that he has no involvement in such melodrama. He simply went back into the basement to be with his family of corpses as his eerie whispers continue, akin to the heavy breathing of Michael Myers in Halloween, only a few years later. Black Christmas is possibly the horror genre's most appreciated, underappreciated films. Everyone knows about it, but it doesn't have the same mainstream iconic status as most of the horror movies it inspired. Honestly, I think where its lack of icon stems from is the simplicity of its killer. Sure, Myers and Co. are simple, but Black Christmas depends on an antagonist who isn't personified. Billy is just you and me. Granted, an extremely troubled you and me, but there's a glimmer of untouched pity to him. I'm not saying I feel any sympathy for him because, after all, his cry for help is overshadowed by this barbaric urge to exact violence on others as an angered response to his psychological torment. There is no justification for his actions, yet, at the end of the day, something that Black Christmas brought to the dinner table long before anyone else was that slasher movies were never as black and white as they appear. They are just about the victims and killers. They are stories driven by a curiosity to explore the unexplained, unknown, and uncertain dangers that lurk beyond the shadows. Hi everyone, thank you so much for watching. What a way to get into the Christmas spirit with one of the bleakest seasonal horror movies I've probably ever seen. Let me know in the comments below what you think of Black Christmas, and even leave what you think is the scariest seasonal horror movie you've ever seen. And until next time, if you enjoy what I do here and you want to support the channel, get early access, and even get your name in the credits, you can do so by heading over to Patreon and supporting me there. I'm very, very grateful for it. And yeah, you can also head over to Instagram and Twitter. I'm on those platforms as well. It's always nice to hear your thoughts on things. And yeah, stay safe, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye!